The letter arrived on the coldest day of winter, 1879, when Abigail Sullivan could barely afford coal for her small house in Ardmore, Colorado. Her trembling fingers tore open the envelope with the bank's official seal, already knowing what it would say. The formal words blurred before her eyes. Foreclosure notice, outstanding debt, 30 days to vacate. The sum at the bottom of the page, $427.38, might as well have been $1 million. Abigail slumped in her wooden kitchen chair, the letter falling from her numb fingers. 2 years of struggling since James had died in the mine collapse. 2 years of taking and mending and washing, of stretching pennies until they screamed, and still it hadn't been enough. At 26, she was about to lose everything. A knock at the door startled her from her despair. Hastily wiping her eyes, Abigail smoothed her faded blue dress and went to answer it. February wind swirled snow across the porch as she pulled open the door. Mrs. Sullivan. The man before her was tall, his shoulders broad beneath a worn sheepskin coat. His face, partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, was weathered but not unkind. "Yes." Her voice emerged smaller than she intended, betraying her distress. "Elijah Nash," he said, removing his hat to reveal sandy hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. "I've just purchased the Wallace Ranch north of town. I'm looking to hire someone to help make the place livable." Abigail gripped the door frame. "I'm sorry, Mr. Nash. I don't know anything about ranch work." A smile softened his features. "I'm not looking for a ranch hand, madam. The place needs a woman's touch, cooking, cleaning, making it a proper home. I hear you're the hardest working woman in Ardmore." Hope flickered briefly, then died. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm afraid I'll be leaving Ardmore soon." The admission burned her throat. His eyes fell to the letter on her kitchen table. Trouble? Something in his direct gaze made it impossible to lie. "The bank's foreclosing. My husband's debts." Elijah Nash nodded slowly, replacing his hat. "I understand. I'll be in town until tomorrow afternoon. If you change your mind about the position, I'll be at the hotel." He tipped his hat and turned to go. "Wait," Abigail called, surprising herself. "What does the job pay?" He turned back, his expression unreadable. $5 a week plus room and board." It was a generous offer, but not enough to save her home in time. "Thank you, but I don't see how that helps my current situation." Elijah studied her for a long moment. "What if I paid off your debt?" Abigail's breath caught. "I beg your pardon, your debt. What if I cleared it? In exchange, you'd come work at the ranch for 1 year." His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather rather than making an extraordinary offer. That's over $400, she stammered. $427.38, he corrected, nodding toward the letter. "I'm looking for someone reliable, Mrs. Sullivan, not just hired help, someone who'll stay." Suspicion crept into her mind. "And what else would you expect for such generosity, Mr. Nash?" His expression hardened slightly. "Nothing improper, if that's what you're asking. You'd have your own room with a lock on the door. I need someone to cook meals, keep house, and provide conversation at supper. That's all." "Just company?" Abigail asked, bewildered. "It gets lonely out there." Something flickered across his face, vulnerability perhaps, gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Do we have an agreement?" Abigail's mind raced. It seemed too good to be true, but what choice did she have? The streets or this stranger's ranch? "I need to think about it." "Fair enough. I'll expect your answer by noon tomorrow." He touched his hat brim and walked away through the swirling snow. Abigail closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. Could she trust him? Did she have any choice? The next morning dawned clear and frigid. Abigail had barely slept, weighing her options until dawn streaked the sky. By 10 o'clock, she'd made her decision. She packed her meager belongings into her husband's old trunk, locked the house that would soon no longer be hers, and trudged through the snow to the Ardmore Hotel. The lobby was warm after the bitter cold outside. Elijah Nash sat in a leather chair near the fireplace, reading a newspaper. He looked up as she approached, folding the paper carefully. "Mrs. Sullivan." "I accept your offer, Mr. Nash," she said, straightening her spine, "but I have conditions." A hint of amusement touched his lips. "I'm listening." "I want it in writing that after 1 year my obligation is fulfilled. I want Sundays free for church, and I want to bring my cat." The last condition seemed trivial compared to the others, but Jasper was her only companion. Elijah Nash considered her for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed on all counts. Wait here." He disappeared for 20 minutes. When he returned, he carried a document and handed it to her. It outlined exactly what they'd discussed, including her conditions, signed with his bold handwriting. "Will this suffice?" he asked. Abigail read it carefully, then nodded. "Yes. Good. I have one stop to make before we leave town." He picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "We'll take my wagon." Their stop was the bank. Abigail waited anxiously in the wagon while Elijah went inside. When he emerged 30 minutes later, he handed her a receipt marked "Paid in Full" and the deed to her home, now free of encumbrance. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked as they drove out of town, her house key tucked safely in her pocket. Elijah kept his eyes on the snowy road ahead. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Mrs. Sullivan." The Wallace Ranch, or Nash Ranch now, Abigail supposed was a 2-hour ride north of Ardmore. As they crested a hill, the property came into view. A sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, and several outbuildings, all situated in a valley protected by pine-covered hills. "It's beautiful," Abigail murmured. "It needs work," Elijah replied, but she detected a note of pride in his voice. Inside, the house was cold and dusty but solidly built. The furniture was old but good quality, covered with sheets to protect it from dust. "Previous owner died last fall," Elijah explained as he showed her around. "Place has been empty since. Your room is upstairs, first door on the right. Mine's at the end of the hall. Kitchen's well equipped but needs cleaning. I'll bring in your trunk and then see to the animals." Left alone, Abigail removed her coat and rolled up her sleeves. By evening, she had the kitchen clean enough to prepare a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and biscuits. When Elijah came in from the barn, stamping snow from his boots, the kitchen was warm and filled with the smell of food. They ate in silence at first, until Abigail remembered part of her job was conversation. "Have you been in Colorado long, Mr. Nash?" "Call me Elijah," he said, buttering a biscuit. "No, I came from Wyoming, had a small spread there, sold it after." He trailed off, then continued, "Decided I needed a change." "I've never been out of Colorado," Abigail admitted. "James, my husband, came west for the mines, and I followed." "You miss him?" It wasn't a question. "Every day," she said softly. "It's been 2 years, but sometimes I still turn to tell him something before I remember he's gone." Elijah nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It gets easier, not better, just easier." "You've lost someone too," Abigail realized. He stood abruptly, gathering his plate. "My wife and daughter. Influenza 3 years ago." His voice was flat, as if reciting facts about strangers. "I'll be in the barn if you need anything." Alone again, Abigail washed the dishes and contemplated her new employer. There was pain behind his calm exterior, a grief that matched her own. Perhaps that explained his strange offer, not charity but a recognition of shared suffering. As winter slowly released its grip on the land, Abigail and Elijah settled into a routine. She cooked and cleaned, making the house livable again room by room. He worked from dawn to dusk, repairing fences, tending livestock, and preparing fields for spring planting. They shared meals in the evening, their conversations gradually extending beyond the day's tasks. Abigail learned that Elijah had been a rancher all his life, following in his father's footsteps. He was 34, well-read despite limited formal education, and possessed a dry wit that emerged when he was relaxed. He never spoke of his wife and daughter unless Abigail asked directly, and even then his answers were brief. March brought warmer days and mud season. Abigail opened windows to air out the musty house and discovered a small flower garden behind the kitchen, now overgrown with weeds. On her first Sunday off, instead of going to church in town as planned, she spent the morning clearing the garden. "You don't have to do that," Elijah said, finding her on her knees in the soil. Abigail looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. "I want to. There were flowers here once. It seems a shame to leave it untended." He stared at the garden as if seeing something else. "My wife would have liked that," he said finally, then walked away. That evening at supper, Elijah seemed preoccupied. As Abigail cleared the table, he finally spoke. "I'll be going to Denver next week. Business at the bank there. I'll be gone 3 days." "I'll keep everything running here," she assured him. "I know you will." He hesitated, then added, "There's a mercantile on Lawrence Street. They have garden seeds. If you want to write down what you need for the garden, I could bring them back." Warmth spread through Abigail's chest at this unexpected thoughtfulness. "I'd appreciate that." The house felt strangely empty with Elijah gone. Abigail hadn't realized how much his presence filled the spaces until it was absent. She took advantage of the time to clean his bedroom, respecting his privacy by touching nothing personal, merely changing linens and sweeping floors. On his desk, she noticed a photograph in a silver frame. A pretty woman with dark hair holding a small girl on her lap, both smiling at the camera. Beside it lay a small leather-bound book. Curiosity made her open it, revealing pages of neat handwriting, a journal. Immediately ashamed, Abigail closed it and finished her cleaning. When Elijah returned from Denver, he brought not only the seeds she'd requested but also fabric for new curtains, a jar of honey, and a book of poetry. "I thought you might enjoy these," he said awkwardly, handing her the honey and book. "The storekeeper said the poet's popular with ladies." "Thank you," Abigail said, touched by the gesture. "I haven't had honey since before James died." That night, after Elijah had gone to his room, Abigail sat by the fire reading Tennyson's poems and realized she felt content for the first time in years. The arrangement was strange, certainly, but perhaps it could work for both of them. April brought long days of planting for Elijah and spring cleaning for Abigail. The house gradually transformed under her care, becoming brighter and more welcoming. She planted her garden, enjoying the feel of soil between her fingers and the promise of beauty to come. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Elijah said casually, "I'll be going into town Saturday. Thought you might like to come along, visit your house, attend church on Sunday." Abigail hadn't left the ranch since arriving 2 months earlier. "I'd like that," she replied, surprised by her reluctance to return to Ardmore even briefly. The town seemed smaller than she remembered. As Elijah handled his business, Abigail visited her house, finding it dusty but undisturbed. She collected a few forgotten items and locked up again, uncertain when she'd return. In the general store, she encountered Martha Wilson, the telegraph operator's wife and Ardmore's premier gossip. "Abigail Sullivan, we'd heard you went to work for that new rancher." Martha's eyes gleamed with curiosity. "How is that arrangement working out?" "Very well," Abigail replied carefully. "Mr. Nash is a fair employer." Martha leaned closer. Just an employer, is he? That's not what people are saying. Heat rushed to Abigail's face. Whatever they're saying is untrue. It's a business arrangement, nothing more, if you say so, dear. Martha's tone made it clear she didn't believe it. Still, a young widow living alone with a bachelor, it does raise questions. Anger flared in Abigail's chest. Mr. Nash has been nothing but respectful. He saved me from destitution when no one else in this town offered help. She set down her basket. Excuse me. She found Elijah at the livery stable, checking the wagon wheel. I'd like to return to the ranch, she said stiffly. He looked up, concern crossing his face. Everything all right, just tired, she lied. They rode in silence until they were well out of town. Finally, Abigail spoke. People are talking about us, about our arrangement. Elijah's hands tightened on the reins. Does that bother you? It shouldn't, she admitted, but it does. They assume impropriety. Small towns run on gossip. His voice was even. We know the truth. Yes, Abigail agreed, but something had shifted between them. For the first time, she was acutely aware of how their situation might appear to others and, more troublingly, of Elijah as a man rather than just her employer. That night, reading by lamplight in her room, Abigail confronted an uncomfortable truth. She was developing feelings for Elijah Nash. Feelings that complicated their arrangement and threatened her independence. She resolved to maintain strict professionalism going forward. May brought wildflowers to the hills and the first blooms in Abigail's garden. It also brought new challenges as Elijah hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increasing work. Sam Porter was an older man with a lifetime of ranching experience. Kyle Jennings was barely 20, eager to learn but prone to mistakes. Having men at the dinner table changed the dynamic. The intimate conversations she and Elijah had shared were replaced by general discussion and ranch business. Abigail told herself this was for the best, even as she missed their evening talks. One afternoon, as Abigail hung laundry in the warm spring air, Kyle approached, hat in hand. Mrs. Sullivan, I was wondering if you might mend my shirt. Tore it on a fence yesterday. Of course, she replied. Leave it on the porch and I'll see to it tomorrow. Kyle shuffled his feet, not leaving. Also wondered if you might like to go to the dance in town next Saturday. Mr. Nash said we could all have the evening off. Startled, Abigail nearly dropped a clothespin. That's very kind, but I don't think it would be appropriate. Because of Mr. Nash, Kyle asked, his young face serious. People in town say you're his woman, but Sam says it ain't like that. It certainly isn't, Abigail said firmly. Mr. Nash is my employer, nothing more, but I'm still in mourning for my husband. Been 2 years, hasn't it? Beggin' your pardon, madam, but life goes on. You're too pretty to be alone forever. With that bold statement, Kyle tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Abigail flustered. At supper, Abigail couldn't meet Elijah's eyes. The young ranch hand's words had unsettled her, not just his assumption about her relationship with Elijah, but also his assertion that she should move on from James. Was 2 years long enough to mourn? The thought had never occurred to her before coming to the ranch. After the men had gone to the bunkhouse, Elijah lingered at the table, nursing a cup of coffee. Kyle tells me he invited you to the dance, he said casually. Abigail busied herself with the dishes. Yes, I declined. Any particular reason? His voice was carefully neutral. She turned to face him. Several. It wouldn't be proper given my position here, and I'm not interested in Kyle that way. Elijah nodded slowly. You could go to the dance if you wanted, not with Kyle, but you're not a prisoner here. I know that. Abigail dried her hands on her apron. But this is where I want to be. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and something electric passed between them. Abigail looked away first, her heart racing. Good night, Mr. Nash, she said softly. Elijah, he corrected. After all this time, I think you can use my given name. Elijah, she repeated. Good night. Good night, Abigail. It was the first time he had used her first name, and the sound of it in his deep voice followed her into her dreams. June brought scorching heat and long days of hard work. Abigail rose before dawn to cook in the relative cool of early morning and spent afternoons preserving the garden's bounty for winter. The men worked from sunrise to sunset, coming in covered in dust and sweat. One evening, Elijah didn't return with the others for supper. Sam explained they'd been mending fences on the north boundary when Elijah's horse had stepped in a prairie dog hole. The horse was fine, but Elijah had been thrown, wrenching his shoulder. He's too stubborn to come in, Sam said, shaking his grizzled head. Says he'll finish the job first. Concern overrode propriety. Abigail packed a basket with food and medicine and had Kyle direct her to where Elijah was working. She found him hammering fence posts one-handed, his face tight with pain. "You're being foolish," she called as she approached. "That shoulder needs attention." Elijah looked up, surprise and something else flickering in his eyes. "It's nothing. I've had worse." "I'm sure you have, but there's no need to suffer needlessly." Abigail spread a cloth on the ground and unpacked her basket. "Eat something and then I'll look at that shoulder." To her surprise, he complied without argument. After he'd eaten, she instructed him to remove his shirt so she could examine the injury. His hesitation was brief but noticeable. "I've tended injured men before," she said gently. "My father was a doctor." Slowly, Elijah unbuttoned his shirt, wincing as he tried to remove it. Abigail helped, careful not to touch him more than necessary. His shoulder was swollen and already bruising, but the joint didn't appear dislocated. "You've strained it badly," she said, her clinical tone belying her awareness of his bare torso, muscled from years of physical labor. "You need to rest it for at least 2 days." "Can't afford the time," he muttered. "You can't afford to make it worse," she countered, applying a salve to reduce the swelling. The feel of his warm skin beneath her fingers made her own hands tremble slightly. As she worked, she noticed a long scar running across his ribs. "What happened here?" "Rustlers years back," he said, his voice strangely tight. "Got careless." She finished bandaging his shoulder in silence, then helped him back into his shirt. As she buttoned it, her fingers brushed against his chest, and she heard his sharp intake of breath. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "Did I hurt you?" "No," Elijah replied, his eyes dark. "Not hurt." The air between them seemed to thicken. Abigail stepped back abruptly. "You should come back to the house. You can tell the men what needs doing tomorrow." "Abigail." Her name on his lips stopped her. "Thank you." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and began packing up the basket. The ride back to the ranch was silent. Both of them lost in thoughts neither dared voice. The next day, despite Abigail's protests, Elijah was back at work, though he limited himself to tasks he could manage one-handed. That evening, a violent thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains, sending the men rushing to secure the animals. Abigail waited anxiously by the window, watching lightning split the sky and counting seconds until thunder followed. The storm was directly overhead when Elijah finally came through the door, soaked to the skin. "The others?" she asked, taking his dripping coat. "In the bunkhouse. Everyone's safe, though Kyle got a scare when lightning hit a tree near the corral." Elijah ran a hand through his wet hair, grimacing as the movement pulled his injured shoulder. "You need dry clothes and something hot to drink," Abigail said, practical concern overriding other emotions. While Elijah changed upstairs, she heated coffee and added a splash of whiskey from the bottle he kept for medicinal purposes. When he returned, she had a chair pulled close to the fire. "Sit," she instructed. You're no good to anyone with pneumonia." He complied, accepting the mug with a grateful nod. Outside, the storm continued to rage, rain lashing against the windows. "When I was a boy," Elijah said after a while, "my mother used to say thunder was God moving furniture in heaven." Abigail smiled, settling into the chair opposite. "My father said it was angels bowling." "What was he like, your father?" Elijah asked. "Kind, patient. He loved his work and believed in helping everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. It's why we never had much money." Abigail stared into the fire. "He would have liked you." "Why do you say that?" She met his gaze. "Because you helped me when you had nothing to gain. That's the sort of man he respected." Elijah looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "I had something to gain, your company." The admission hung in the air between them. Was it worth it? Abigail asked softly. $427.38 for conversation at dinner. Yes. The simple answer, delivered without hesitation, made her heart skip. "Though I think I got the better end of the bargain." The storm outside mirrored the tumult in Abigail's chest. This man had saved her from ruin, asking only for her presence in return. And somehow, over the months, he had become essential to her happiness in a way she hadn't thought possible after James. "I should check the windows upstairs," she said, rising abruptly. "Sometimes they leak in heavy rain." "Abigail." Elijah's voice stopped her again, just as it had in the field. "I never expected. I didn't bring you here thinking." "I know," she assured him, understanding his unfinished thought. "Good night, Elijah." July brought a heat wave that left everyone short-tempered and exhausted. The creek that supplied water to the ranch slowed to a trickle, forcing the men to dig deeper into the streambed to create pools for the cattle to drink. Despite the difficulty, the ranch was thriving under Elijah's management. New calves grew strong, fields yielded good hay, and Abigail's garden produced abundantly. They were building something sustainable, something that could last. The thought both comforted and troubled her. Her year of service would end in February. What then? Return to Ardmore and her empty house. The idea held no appeal, but staying would mean acknowledging feelings she wasn't sure she was ready to confront, or that Elijah reciprocated. One scorching afternoon, Abigail was preserving peaches when Kyle burst into the kitchen, his young face pale with alarm. "Mrs. Sullivan." "Mr. Nash sent me to fetch you. Sam's been hurt bad, kicked by a horse. They're bringing him in now." Abigail wiped her hands and quickly gathered medical supplies. By the time Elijah and 3 cowboys from a neighboring ranch carried Sam to the house, she had the dining table cleared and covered with clean sheets. Sam's leg was broken, the bone visibly displaced beneath the skin. He was conscious but gray with pain and blood loss. "Need to set it before the swelling gets worse," Abigail said, cutting away his pant leg. "Hold him down." The men looked at her doubtfully, but Elijah nodded. "Do as she says." With Elijah and 2 cowboys restraining Sam, Abigail manipulated the broken bone back into place. Sam's scream echoed through the house, then he mercifully passed out. Working quickly, she splinted and bandaged the leg. "He'll need a proper doctor," she told Elijah, "but this will hold until then." "I'll ride for Doc Harris," Kyle volunteered. "Be back by morning if I push hard." As the other men carried Sam to the spare bedroom, Elijah remained, watching Abigail clean up the bloody cloths and instruments. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked. "My father," she replied, her hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her. "I assisted him from the time I was 12, set my first bone when I was 16. "Why didn't you become a doctor yourself?" Abigail gave a humorless laugh. "Women aren't allowed in medical school, Elijah. Besides, I met James when I was 19. He had dreams of striking it rich in the mines, and I had dreams of a home and children." She paused, the old grief washing over her. Neither of us got what we wanted. Elijah moved closer, gently taking the bloody basin from her hands. You saved Sam's leg, possibly his life. That's something. It's not enough, she whispered, suddenly overwhelmed by everything: the heat, the blood, the memories of her father and James, and most of all, the man standing before her who made her feel things she had no right to feel. Abigail. Elijah's voice was soft. His hand, warm and calloused, lifted her chin until she met his gaze. It's enough for today. Before either could say more, Kyle called from outside, ready to ride for the doctor. The moment passed, but something had shifted yet again between them. Doc Harris arrived the next morning, praised Abigail's handiwork, and confirmed that Sam would recover but needed weeks of rest. This meant more work for everyone else during the busiest season. August brought no relief from the heat. Abigail rose before dawn to do laundry and cooking before the day became unbearable. One morning, desperate for relief, she took soap and a clean dress to the swimming hole half a mile from the house, a deep pool in the creek shaded by cottonwoods. The cold water was blissful after days of relentless heat. Abigail scrubbed away sweat and dust, then floated on her back, watching sunlight filter through the leaves above. For the first time in weeks, she felt cool and at peace. A sound from the bank startled her. Elijah stood there, as surprised to see her as she was to see him. He immediately turned his back. "I'm sorry," he called. "I didn't know you were here." Abigail sank deeper into the water, mortified. "It's all right, I was just leaving. No need to rush, I'll come back later." He started to walk away. "Elijah, wait." The words escaped before she could stop them. "The water's wonderful. There's room enough to share if you turn your back until I'm dressed." His shoulders tensed, but he nodded. Abigail quickly waded to shore and dressed behind a large boulder, her heart pounding more from the situation than exertion. "I'm decent," she called when finished. Elijah approached cautiously, still in his work clothes. "I can come back another time. Don't be silly." "It's too hot to waste a chance to cool off." Abigail busied herself wringing water from her hair. "I'll turn my back." After a moment's hesitation, Elijah began unbuttoning his shirt. Abigail determinedly faced away, listening to the rustle of clothing and then the splash as he entered the water. "You can turn around now," he said. Elijah floated in the deepest part of the pool, the water covering him to his shoulders. His clothes lay neatly folded on a rock beside hers. An awkward silence fell, broken only by the gentle sound of water lapping at the banks. "This reminds me of swimming holes back home," Elijah finally said. "My brothers and I practically lived in the creek during summer." "You never mentioned having brothers," Abigail said, settling on a rock with her feet dangling in the water. "3 of them, all still in Wyoming." A shadow crossed his face. "We don't speak much since Sarah and Lily died. They thought I should stay, but I couldn't. Too many memories." "I understand," Abigail said softly. "After James died, everyone said I should go back east to my cousins. But I couldn't bear to leave the life we'd planned, even if all that remained was debt and an empty house." Elijah swam closer until he could stand with the water at his chest. "Do you regret staying?" "No," she answered truthfully. "If I'd gone east, I would never have met you." The admission hung between them like a tangible thing. He moved closer still, until only a foot of water separated them. "Abigail, I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, shouts from the direction of the ranch interrupted the moment. Kyle was calling for them, panic evident in his voice. "Fire," they heard as they grabbed their things. Fire in the south pasture. The rest of the day was chaos as everyone fought to contain the wildfire started by a carelessly discarded cigar from a passing traveler. By nightfall, they had saved the ranch buildings and most of the pasture, but several acres of grassland were charred ruins, and everyone was exhausted and smoke-stained. Whatever Elijah had meant to say at the swimming hole remained unspoken. The fire created new urgencies, moving cattle to undamaged pastures, assessing losses, planning for winter feed with part of the hay crop destroyed. September brought cooler weather and the cattle roundup. Cowboys from neighboring ranches came to help, turning the quiet ranch into a bustling camp. Abigail cooked for 15 men 3 times a day, falling into bed each night too tired to think about anything beyond the next day's meals. Elijah was everywhere at once, directing the roundup, negotiating with buyers, solving problems as they arose. He and Abigail barely exchanged 10 words a day, passing like ships in the night. The night before the cattle drive to the railroad, Abigail sat on the porch mending one of Elijah's shirts by lamplight. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, stars brilliant in the clear sky. The door opened and Elijah stepped out, looking as tired as she felt. "You should be resting," he said. "Dawn comes early. I wanted to finish this for you to take on the drive." She held up the mended shirt. He sat beside her on the porch step. "You do too much." "It's my job," she reminded him, though they both knew her duties had expanded far beyond their original agreement. "I'll be gone 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, Elijah said after a while. "Kyle will stay to help with chores. Sam can manage the accounts if any bills come due." Abigail nodded, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest at the thought of his absence. "Be careful, always am." He hesitated, then added, "At the swimming hole before the fire. There was something I wanted to tell you." Abigail's hand stilled on her mending. "Yes." Elijah stared out at the darkness. "The day I came to your door in Ardmore wasn't a coincidence. I'd been watching you for weeks." Confusion replaced anticipation. "What do you mean?" "I saw you in church my first Sunday in town. You were sitting alone, wearing a blue dress with a tear in the sleeve that you'd mended nearly invisibly. You sang every hymn from memory." His voice was soft with the recollection. "Something about you. I asked about you afterward. Learned your story, widow, husband's debts, struggling to keep your home. You were watching me." Abigail wasn't sure whether to be flattered or alarmed. "Not in a sinister way," Elijah clarified quickly. "I just noticed you, admired your courage, then I heard about the foreclosure notice and—" He trailed off, embarrassed. "I wanted to help, but I knew you wouldn't accept charity." "So you created a job," Abigail finished, understanding dawning. "You never really needed a housekeeper." "I did need one," he insisted, "but I could have hired anyone. I wanted it to be you." He finally looked at her. "Are you angry?" She should be, Abigail thought. He had manipulated the situation, orchestrated their entire arrangement under false pretenses. And yet she couldn't summon anger. "Why me?" she asked instead. Elijah's gaze was steady. "Because you reminded me that life goes on, even after loss. Because you were fighting so hard all alone. Because when you smiled at the little Johnson girl who brought you wildflowers after church, it was the first genuine smile I'd seen in 3 years." He took a deep breath. "Because I thought maybe we could help each other heal." The simple honesty of his answer moved her deeply. "And have we healed?" "I'm getting there," he said quietly. "Because of you." Abigail reached out and took his hand, an intimacy she would never have dared before. "So am I, because of you." They sat in silence, hands clasped, until the lamp began to sputter. Before they parted for the night, Elijah raised her hand to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and profoundly intimate. "Wait for me," he said simply. "I will," she promised. The cattle drive departed at dawn, taking Elijah and most of the hands with it. The ranch seemed eerily quiet with just Kyle, Sam, and Abigail remaining. She threw herself into work harvesting the last of the garden, preserving food for winter, deep cleaning the house, anything to make the days pass more quickly. At night, she read and reread Tennyson by lamplight, finding new meaning in verses about love and longing. She had stopped wearing her mourning clothes months ago, but now she consciously put away other reminders of her widowhood. It was time to look forward, not back. 2 weeks stretched to 3 with no word from the cattle drive. Worry gnawed at Abigail as September gave way to October. Finally, a rider from town brought a telegram. Drive successful, weather delay, home soon. The brief message brought both relief and renewed impatience. Home, he had written, not ranch or returning. Home. The first snow fell on October 12th, dusting the hills with white. Abigail was kneading bread dough when hoofbeats in the yard sent her rushing to the door. Elijah dismounted wearily, his face weathered and bearded from weeks on the trail. He stopped when he saw her in the doorway, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other, drinking in the sight. "Welcome home," Abigail said softly. His smile transformed his tired face. "It's good to be home." That evening, after Elijah had bathed and shaved, they sat before the fire while he told her about the drive, the difficult river crossing, the storm that had delayed them, the good price the cattle had brought. "I stopped at the bank in Denver," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Had them draw up some papers." He handed her an envelope. Inside, Abigail found a bank draft for $427.38, exactly the amount of her debt. "I don't understand," she said, looking up at him in confusion. "Your year of service isn't up until February, but I'm releasing you from our contract," Elijah explained. "You're free to go back to Ardmore or anywhere else you choose." Hurt and confusion washed over her. After their conversation before the cattle drive, she had thought. But apparently she had misunderstood. "I see," she said stiffly, folding the bank draft and returning it to the envelope. "When would you like me to leave?" "That's not." Elijah ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm making a mess of this. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm giving you a choice." "A choice?" He moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking both her hands in his. "I want you to stay, Abigail, not as my housekeeper, not because of a contract, but because you want to, because we want the same things." Hope bloomed in her chest, but she needed clarity. "And what things do we want, Elijah?" His blue eyes were earnest, vulnerable. "A home, a family, a second chance at happiness." He squeezed her hands gently. "Each other. Are you asking me to marry you?" Abigail whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "Not very well, apparently," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "But yes, I am asking you to be my wife, if you'll have me." Joy rose in Abigail like the sun after a long night. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will have you." Elijah's face lit with wonder. He rose, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. Their first kiss was tender, a promise sealed, a new beginning. They were married in the Ardmore Church on the first Sunday in November, 1879. Martha Wilson nearly fainted when she received her invitation, and the entire town turned out to see the widow Sullivan wed the prosperous rancher who had once paid her debts. If anyone thought the bride's radiant smile had nothing to do with financial security and everything to do with love, they kept it to themselves. Winter settled over the ranch, snow transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland. Inside, the house was warm with more than just firelight. Abigail and Elijah moved through their days together, learning each other, building their life one moment at a time. In the evenings, they often sat before the fire, sometimes reading aloud from Tennyson or discussing plans for spring planting. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, Elijah's arm around Abigail's shoulders, her head resting against him. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Elijah confessed one snowy night. "After Sarah and Lily died, I was sure that part of me was gone forever." "I felt the same after James," Abigail said softly. "It seems impossible that hearts can heal so completely." "Not completely," he corrected, his voice gentle. "There will always be scars, but scars mean survival." She turned in his arms to face him. "Do you ever feel guilty?" "For being happy again?" Elijah considered the question carefully. "I did at first, but Sarah wouldn't have wanted me to live half a life. James wouldn't have wanted that for you either." "No," Abigail agreed. "He wouldn't." She pressed her palm to Elijah's cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin, the solidity of him. "I love you, Elijah Nash." His eyes darkened at her words. "I love you, Abigail Nash." Their kiss deepened, filled with promise and passion. Abigail knew with certainty that their future together would be rich and full. A tapestry woven from shared joys and sorrows, work and rest, giving and receiving. February 1880 marked 1 year since Elijah had appeared at her door in Ardmore with his strange proposition. They celebrated quietly, reminiscing about their inauspicious beginning. "Did you ever imagine it would end like this?" Abigail asked as they lay together in the darkness, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "I hoped," Elijah admitted. "From the moment I saw you in that blue dress, I hoped." Abigail smiled against his skin. "You paid a high price for hope. $427.38. His laugh rumbled through his chest. "Best investment I ever made." Spring came early that year, as if nature itself blessed their new beginning. The garden Abigail had reclaimed bloomed more abundantly than ever, and the first calf born on the ranch that season was exceptionally strong and healthy, a good omen, according to Sam. In late April, as they picnicked by the swimming hole that had witnessed their growing feelings the previous summer, Abigail shared news of her own. "I've been to see Doc Harris," she said, watching Elijah's face carefully. "We're going to have a baby. In November." Joy transformed his features, followed quickly by concern. "Are you feeling well? Should you be resting more? I can hire help for the house." Abigail laughed, pressing his hand to her still flat stomach. "I'm perfectly well. Women have been having babies while working since the beginning of time." "Not my wife," Elijah declared firmly. "You'll rest as much as needed." "We'll compromise," she suggested, knowing his protectiveness came from love and from the loss he had already endured. "I'll be sensible but not idle." As her body changed with the growing child, Abigail found herself reflecting on the strange path that had led her to this happiness. 2 years ago, she had been drowning in grief and debt, seeing no way forward. Now she was loved, secure, and expecting the child she had once given up hope of having. The ranch prospered along with them. Elijah's careful management and willingness to try new methods paid dividends. They added a room to the house for the baby, replaced the aging roof, and purchased additional cattle from a neighboring rancher who was retiring. "We should invite your brothers to visit," Abigail suggested as they prepared for the harvest in late summer. "It's time to mend those fences." Elijah was resistant at first, but eventually agreed to write to his family in Wyoming. To his surprise, his eldest brother responded immediately with plans to visit in the spring, after the baby had arrived and winter travel hazards had passed. "They thought I was running away," Elijah explained after reading the letter. "Maybe I was. But I was also running toward something, even if I didn't know it yet." November brought an early snowstorm, and with it, their son. The labor was long but uncomplicated, ending with the lusty cries of James Elijah Nash, named for the fathers who had shaped both their lives. Watching Elijah hold their son for the first time, his face a mixture of awe, love, and lingering grief for the daughter he had lost, Abigail felt her heart might burst with happiness. They had found each other in darkness and built something beautiful from the ashes of their previous lives. "He's perfect," Elijah whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny fingers. "He is," Abigail agreed, "and he's just the beginning." By the baby's first birthday, the Nash Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the county. The house was filled with laughter and music. Abigail's piano playing, a skill rediscovered after years of neglect, often accompanying Elijah's surprisingly good tenor as they sang old hymns and popular songs in the evening. Young James grew strong and curious, the image of his father with his mother's gentle spirit. Abigail sometimes caught Elijah watching the boy with an expression that mingled joy with remembered sorrow, but the shadows in his eyes grew less frequent as time passed. In the spring of 1882, Elijah's brothers arrived for their promised visit, bringing their wives and children. The house overflowed with Nash relatives, the awkwardness of long separation quickly giving way to renewed connections. "You've done well, little brother," Robert, the eldest, said as they surveyed the ranch from a hilltop. "Sarah would be proud." "I think she would," Elijah agreed, his voice steady. "She always said life was for the living." That summer brought another surprise. Abigail discovered she was expecting again. Their daughter, Elizabeth Sarah Nash, was born in February 1883, a delicate beauty with her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes. "Our family is complete now," Abigail said as they watched 3-year-old James cautiously touching his baby sister's hand. Elijah's arm tightened around her shoulders. "For now, perhaps, but I wouldn't mind a few more if you're willing." Abigail leaned into his embrace, content beyond measure. "I never imagined this life," she confessed. "When you paid my debt and brought me here, I thought I was simply trading one form of survival for another. I never dreamed." "Neither did I," Elijah said softly. "I thought I was buying company, someone to ease the loneliness. Instead, I found everything I never knew I was looking for." Their life together wasn't without challenges. Drought years came, markets fluctuated, and children fell ill with childhood diseases that brought sleepless nights of worry. But they faced each difficulty together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. By 1889, 10 years after Elijah had appeared at Abigail's door in Ardmore, the Nash Ranch had expanded to include 3,000 acres and a reputation for quality stock that brought buyers from as far away as Chicago. Their family had grown as well, with the addition of twin boys, Daniel and David, born in 1885. On the anniversary of their first meeting, they made a pilgrimage to Abigail's old house in Ardmore, which they still owned but had long since rented to a respectable young couple. "It looks smaller than I remember," Abigail remarked as they stood on the street outside. "Everything does when you've grown beyond it," Elijah replied, his hair now touched with silver at the temples but his eyes as bright and keen as ever. That evening, back at the ranch with their 4 children tucked safely in bed, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, just as they had so many times before. "You ever regret it?" Elijah asked suddenly. "The arrangement we made, coming here as my housekeeper?" Abigail turned to study his face, still handsome after all these years. "Never, not for a single moment." She took his hand, feeling the strength and gentleness that had supported her through a decade of love. "What about you? $427 was a lot of money back then." Elijah brought her hand to his lips, just as he had the night before the cattle drive all those years ago. "It was the best deal I ever made," he said simply. "And I'd pay it 1,000 times over to have the life we've built together." As darkness fell over the land they had nurtured together, Abigail Nash rested her head on her husband's shoulder and gave thanks for the debt that had nearly destroyed her and for the man who had seen beyond it to the possibility of love. In the years that followed, their children grew strong and capable. The ranch prospered, and Ardmore blossomed into a thriving town with the railroad's arrival. Through it all, Abigail and Elijah remained each other's center, their love deepening with each passing season. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were grown with families of their own, they would sit together on the porch of the house that had become a true home, and marvel at how a desperate arrangement born of debt and loneliness had transformed into a lifetime of love and abundance. Neither could have imagined that snowy day in 1879. For Abigail, who had once been drowning in debt and despair, and for Elijah, who had paid it all and asked only for her company, life had given them far more than either had dared to hope: a second chance, a shared journey, and the enduring knowledge that some debts can never be repaid, only passed forward in love.